Elon Musk may be stepping down from Twitter. A Dedham human rights commissioner freaks out over a Christmas tree. And I interview Jessica Vaughn from the Center for Immigration Studies on what is going on at our southern border. I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Everyone, it is Tuesday, December 20th, 2022, which means that we are officially 5 days away from Christmas. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I have not purchased a single Christmas present for everyone, so I really got to get on that. And reminder to you to do the same if you've been lagging like me. I also want to take this time to remind you to please consider donating to the Sheriff's Relief Foundation. I talked about this charity last week, but there was a terrible incident that occurred on November 16th in Whittier, California, where 75 LA County Sheriff recruits were on a jog when suddenly a 22-year-old driver crossed over lanes of traffic and mowed over about 25 of those recruits. Almost all of them were sent to the hospital and many lost limbs. So there's this charity that has been set up to help them and their families. So please, because we are so close from Christmas especially, I really would like to encourage you to consider donating. You can Venmo them at SRA Foundation 1. That's SRA Foundation 1. And I will also put the mailing address in the description below in case you would prefer to send something by snail mail. And thank you very much for your consideration. Now on to other news. Elon Musk may be stepping down from Twitter. We don't really know yet. Things are seeming to be a little bit unclear. But if he follows a recent poll that he posted, it looks like he is out as CEO. On Sunday night, Elon posted a poll to Twitter asking a very simple question: should I leave? And 57.5% voted yes, whereas 42.5% voted no. So again, we haven't heard anything as to whether or not he is going to follow this poll, but if he does, then it means that he is no longer the CEO of Twitter. Now, when I saw on Sunday night that he decided to do this poll, it reminded me a bit of Trump in the kind of ways that Trump makes decisions. This tweet from Elon Musk seemed to reflect a personality-driven way of managing. It seemed to reflect that he likes to make decisions impulsively, that he likes to seem volatile or do things for the shock and effect of things. On the one hand, I think that this is a refreshing way to make decisions. Obviously, being impulsive and volatile is not a great thing, but at least with this Twitter poll, you know what's going on. You know that it's a poll that's lasting for 12 hours. If people vote yes, then he'll step down. If people vote no, he won't step down. And you know how that decision was made. Whereas a lot of the times when the left makes decisions, they love to defer to a bureaucratic procedural way of doing things. So often they like to defer to committees or to board members, or to representatives, or task forces, or the head of XYZ group who will conduct a study or a poll, who will get back to this person, who will send a mass email to others, who will somehow aggregate things together and make a decision. That's the crazy, confused world of the left. And Trump and Elon Musk offer, again, a somewhat refreshing alternative, even though it may be a bit impulsive, of saying, this is how I make decisions, I'm in charge, and this is how I'm going to do it. So again, we will keep you updated as to whether or not he follows it. And even if he does follow it and step down from Twitter, this is not the last time that we are going to be hearing from Mr. Musk. He still owns the company, which means that he will hand pick the next CEO of Twitter, should there be a next one, or he will have to approve of the next one. It does seem that Elon Musk wants to step down from Twitter, and he is using a poll like this to sort of cover himself, to say, oh, this is what the people want, instead of admitting that it's what he actually wants. And again, as refreshing as this way of making decisions is, it unfortunately does make him seem like he views Twitter as a toy. Like it's just something that he can play around with and make decisions about willy-nilly. And sadly, I think that's going to damage his reputation. Now, speaking of toys, as I said, it is almost Christmas time. And as happy as I am about that, there seem to be some others who are not as thrilled. There is a fascinating story that emerged last week coming from the Endicott branch of a public library in Dedham, Massachusetts, where the library decided not to put up their annual Christmas tree decoration. Now, one of the library employees, Lisa Desmond, took to Twitter to lament this decision. And she tweeted out this message saying, "What the heck is going on at my library? I've been working here for 2 decades. We've never not put up our Christmas celebrations. And the reason this year why we're not putting them up is that apparently they make some people uncomfortable." So she was sort of verbally on Twitter rolling her eyes at that decision. Then she got a response from a Dedham Human Rights Commissioner named Diane Loud. Now you see I stumbled on that name because what the heck is a Dedham Human Rights Commissioner? Like, who sets up a group like that? What are they tasked with doing? It just seems a bit pointless and odd. But nevertheless, there is this group, and one of their commissioners, Diane Loud, had a expletive-laced response to Lisa Desmond and others lamenting the fact that no Christmas tree decorations are going up. She said, "I hope you know," again, this is Diane Loud saying this to the pro-Christmas tree decoration people, "I hope you know the fact that you, who claim to believe in Christ and Christmas, or whatever happy horses you're trying to hide behind, you are the least gracious, most hateful, most disgusting trash in the world." These are the people who want to celebrate Christmas. They are the least gracious, most hateful, most disgusting trash in the world, and supposedly their religiosity is just a bunch of happy horses. Okay? And that's not the end of it. She continues, "Is this what you think your magic sky daddy wants?" Diane Loud said. "Where in the Bible was this again?" In closing, she wrote, "I hate each and every one of you, and I do wish great suffering on you. You are terrible, terrible people, and you did it all because you didn't get your way. You are despicable." Okay? Again, this is a human rights commissioner who is saying that it is a hateful act to want to put up a Christmas tree at a public library. Now, thankfully, there was a lot of backlash to Diane Loud's comments, and she has stepped down from her mysterious role as a human rights commissioner in Dedham, Massachusetts. But what I want to point out here is that an incident like this is not just something that we should laugh at or roll our eyes at and say, "Oh my gosh, how absurd." This is becoming more mainstream in our culture, to have contempt and outright hatred for Western religion and for traditional values. It seems that Christians in this country, and by extension, white Christians, are one of the only groups who people can outwardly, aggressively, constantly, and proudly ridicule and discriminate against with very little backlash. Can you imagine if Miss Diane Loud said that people who are trying to put up decorations for Ramadan or for a non-Christian holiday, can you imagine if she said that those people are the least gracious, most hateful, disgusting trash in the world and that their magic sky daddy wouldn't want this? Can you imagine what that reaction would be? Why is it that it's okay when that hate is directed at Christians, but it's not okay when it's directed at other groups that are not historically Western? Now, what's interesting is that although Diane Loud did step down from her position at the Dedham Human Rights Commission, she did not issue a public apology for her vitriol, and neither did the human rights group that she was a part of. In fact, when the head of that group announced Diane Loud's resignation, they didn't say anything about her messages. They only said that they appreciated her service. And again, I say that there is an astounding amount of anti-Christian bigotry because this is just not one fluke example. This is something that is permeating our culture. I don't know if many of you know this. You probably don't because the mainstream media doesn't report on this. But Merrick Garland, over the past few months, have sent FBI SWAT teams to the homes of fathers who committed the grave offense of praying in front of abortion clinics. These are pro-life parents who are being persecuted by Merrick Garland's Justice Department, frankly, because they are pro-life. Although Merrick Garland would never say that they're being persecuted because they're pro-life, why is he sending multi-member, heavily armed SWAT teams for people who were just praying? Meanwhile, his DOJ took a month to arrest Sam Bankman-Fried, who committed fraud, as he remained at liberty in the Bahamas. Doesn't it seem like there is a political motivation there or a political difference? Another example, famously we know about, is that football coach in Washington State who was fired because he prayed on the football field. Now, thankfully, that case has made it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has ruled in the football coach's favor. But the fact that it even had to get there for a simple prayer, that shows this anti-Christian bigotry. Even the anecdotal evidence of the fact that so many Christians in America feel shame for expressing their religiosity or feel apprehensive to come forth with it in a classroom or in a job interview indicates this level of bigotry against Christians. And finally, a recent report published by the Department of Homeland Security said that ever since Biden took office 2 years ago, 5 million undocumented immigrants have come across our southern border. Now, Biden administration official Keisha Lance Bottoms was on the news the other day and asked about why President Biden hasn't visited the southern border, and let's hear what she said.
Well, why doesn't he go to the border? He was just in Arizona. Why wasn't it worth his time?
Well, you have to remember, Margaret, when the president travels, it's not like you or I jumping on an airplane and getting off and going to our destination. Everything comes to a halt. So all of these things are in consideration for the president. Is that the best use of resources? All of the resources that will be diverted on the ground when the president makes a visit.
Is that why he didn't go?
Is that visit... Well, I can't speak to why he has or has not gone. I'm just speaking to the fact that it's a bit more disruptive for the president of the United States to travel than you or I. But what the president has done is continue to lean in on this immigration issue. It's something that he ran on. And what we know over the past 2 years, every single thing that the president has run on, he's put time and resources into addressing it.
So she says that President Biden is leaning in on this immigration issue. Well, let's talk about how he's leaning in. This Wednesday, Title 42, which is a stipulation that immigrants can be deported or prevented from coming into the United States for medical reasons, Title 42 will expire this coming Wednesday. Trump enacted Title 42 back during COVID in order to prevent COVID transmission from people who are immigrating from other countries. But although Biden claims to care about COVID and public health, he's letting this, again, expire this coming Wednesday. Here to talk with me about immigration and Title 42 is Jessica Vaughn, who is the head of policy studies for the Center for Immigration Studies. I'm a big fan of Ms. Vaughn. I've read many of her articles over the years and benefited greatly from her expertise. I'm very happy to have her on the show today.
It's my pleasure, Julie. Glad to be with you.
So let's start out talking about, in general, what's going on at the southern border. I'd like for you to please paint a picture for me of what's happening. Where are most of the immigrants coming from? What is their demographic characteristics? And crucially, what are their primary motivations for wanting to come here?
Good question. What we have going on now at our southern border is really a mass migration event that is happening, with thousands, as many as 7,000 people crossing the border illegally every single day. 10 years ago, it would be considered a crisis if 1,000 people were apprehended by the Border Patrol crossing illegally, but we're way beyond that now. And we have people from literally every nation around the planet who are being apprehended, according to the Border Patrol. Pretty much every country and that in the world, people are coming from there because they have heard either from smugglers or in the news media or from friends and family that if they can make it to the U.S. southern border, that they stand a very good chance of being allowed to stay in the United States, especially if they come with a child, if they're a family, or if they say they fear return to their home country. That's why they're coming, because of our policies. But my colleagues have talked to people both after they've been apprehended or while they're waiting to cross illegally, or even down as far away as Panama, preparing to make the journey up north to the border. What they say is that they're coming because they're pretty sure that they're going to succeed in getting into the United States, that they're seeking a better life. They want work. They want to support their family. They're not necessarily coming because they're being persecuted or because there's some kind of humanitarian crisis in their home country. This is illegal migration of opportunism, the opportunity to get into the United States. They're not going to spend thousands of dollars from their life savings or put themselves into debt bondage with the smuggler unless they think there's a good chance that they're going to be allowed to stay. And that's exactly what's happening.
So it's primary for economic reasons as opposed to political persecution.
Right, for an improved quality of life.
So let's say there's a group of 10 immigrants that come to our southern border. Let's say that there's a mother and a father, 3 children, and then a few unattached men. Let's say they encounter ICE. I want to ask you, what is supposed to happen in that situation? And then on the flip side, what really does happen under the Biden administration in that case?
Yeah, well, a little bit depends on the exact scenario, but if they encounter the Border Patrol, what's supposed to happen is that they are supposed to be arrested and questioned to make sure that, to see if they have some kind of likelihood of fleeing persecution and have not gone through a safe third country to get to the US border. And if they're encountered in the interior of the country, which is where they'd be more likely to encounter ICE, then they're supposed, if they cannot show that they're here legally, they're supposed to be arrested and put into deportation proceedings. And if they're recent arrivals, they're supposed to actually be detained until they have their due process, which would be to have the chance to make a claim for asylum, a credible claim, or some other form of immigration relief. But very few people in the world who cross illegally are going to be able to show that they should be allowed to stay in the United States under our law. They don't necessarily qualify for asylum. They don't have family ties or an employment offer. And so they should be detained and returned. Instead, the Biden administration is using an authority called parole to basically allow everyone in, tell them to show up at an ICE office near their destination and file an application for asylum. But what's really happening is only half of the people who are allowed in are actually showing up at the ICE office to register and submit an asylum application. They're not even bothering with the asylum application. And half of those who file the asylum application are not showing up for their court hearings. And of those who do show up for their court hearings, less than 10% are found qualified to receive asylum here and stay permanently. The rest just skip out and they're living here as illegal residents all over the country. And under the Biden administration, ICE officers are not allowed to try to locate them or hold them, accountable for skipping out on the generous due process that we've offered them. They're simply allowed to live here without any fear of enforcement.
So really,
Some
they
of them
get
are even getting work permits. They're allowing them, if they actually show up for their court hearings, they're allowing them to apply for work permits, which is unprecedented.
so in a way they're being rewarded for not showing up to the court hearing, because if they don't show up, then you're saying the Biden administration ICE officials are not allowed to go after them.
That's
I did not know that. That is just
Yeah, they
stunning.
have no fear of enforcement because they know that ICE is limited to pursuing only a very few cases of the most egregious criminals who've committed very serious crimes here, and after they've been released from jail or prison. Those are the only people who are subject to immigration enforcement at this point.
I want to talk about crime and drugs because, as you know, we're facing a huge fentanyl crisis in this country. Fentanyl is the #1 cause of death for people ages 18 to 45, and Governor Greg Abbott just announced that the state of Texas alone in the past fiscal year seized 342 million pounds of lethal overdoses of fentanyl, which could kill every single living American. So I want to ask you, how many people, in your estimate, coming to our southern border are criminals, or they're bringing drugs?
Well, it's probably only a small fraction of the number who are being caught by the Border Patrol. And the reason for that is because there's this mass migration of anybody who thinks that they can, make it to the southern border trying to cross. But there are a lot of people, and really more people than in recent years, who are being apprehended who do have criminal records. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is that they know that if they can make it back into the United States, that more than likely ICE is not going to come looking for them. But also because most of the criminals are in this population known as gotaways, because what happens is these large groups of illegal migrants are brought across by the smugglers in an area where they know that they can make contact with the Border Patrol and be allowed into the United States. And while the Border Patrol is occupied and really overwhelmed with dealing with these thousands of migrants coming in these very large groups, just kind of wandering in, the Border Patrol is distracted. So the criminal smugglers send those that do not want to actually come in contact with our officials in another place. They're pouring in through these unguarded parts of the border. That's where the criminals, the people who've been deported before, the people bringing drugs, that's how they're all getting in through this gotaway population. And that last year was estimated to be about 500,000 people. Wow. That's a lot of people. So, this is why our unguarded border is such a national security and public safety threat to our country. In fact, last year they found 98 people who were on the terrorist list of known and suspected terrorists. Those are people we actually knew about who were caught crossing the border illegally. If we caught almost 100 terrorists, imagine how many got through in the gotaway population.
Yes. Well, President Trump, as we both know and very well, had very strict border policy, and he received a lot of flack for that. And one of the things that the left said about him is that he was separating families at the border. So I want to ask you, is that true that he was separating families at the border? And does that policy continue now?
Well, the people who are subject to a policy that is separating kids from an adult, in most cases, that occurs when the adult is not actually the parent of a child. In those cases, or when the adult is criminal and it's not appropriate for the United States to allow this family unit to be released into the United States. That it is still happening now because there are still lots of smugglers who are putting together fake families and renting children to people, unrelated adults who want to cross into the United States and try to fool the Border Patrol. The policy, though, that I think you're referring to happened when the Trump administration decided that they needed to do something to stop this, what at the time was considered a crisis, but is, much less than we're seeing now. And they wanted to have a zero tolerance policy for illegal crossings and thought that adult migrants would be deterred if they were going to be prosecuted. And in that case, the kids had to be separated from their parents because the parents were going to be incarcerated in immigration detention, which is not an appropriate place to put a child.
Mm-hmm.
And also because a judge in California ruled that the government could not detain children even if they were with their parents. So she kind of tied the hands of the federal government and said, you just, if kids, anyone crossing with kids has to be let go. And this is part of what has set off this mass migration crisis is one judge in California saying, you can't detain anyone who comes with kids. Well, when kids are a deportation shield, everyone is going to try to cross with a child. And that has led to some horrific incidents of human trafficking and using kids with everyone you can imagine to try to get them over the border and allowed into the country. There was a report just this week of Hyundai-owned companies in Alabama using children to work in car part manufacturing factories. Kids as young as 12 years old are being put to work on the assembly line. That's the kind of situation we find with this open border policy where if you have a kid, you're going to be allowed in. It leads to child endangerment, child abuse, trafficking, and worse scenarios.
I saw a movie back in high school about a young woman who was forced to swallow bags of cocaine to bring drugs across our border. How many people who are bringing these drugs are doing it from coercion, would you estimate?
I would say almost all of them end up in a situation like this because that's what happened. The smugglers now, this business is so lucrative and they know that almost anyone that they bring to the border is going to be allowed to stay. What they're telling people is, you only need to make a down payment on your smuggling fee. Like, let's say they're charging $8,000 or $10,000 to bring someone across to the United States. They're saying, okay, you can put down $2,000, $3,000, which is easier for these migrants to come up with. And then once they're in the United States, they owe a debt to the smuggler. They have to pay it off, and they are in bondage to that criminal organization. And they've got to pay. How are they going to pay it off? Maybe by serving as a mule for drugs, maybe by working for the cartel within the United States, maybe by working at a restaurant run by a human trafficker. And these are debts that can never be repaid, let's be honest. They then charge the migrants for ridiculous amounts of money to live in hovels. They charge them for transportation. They charge them for their fake documents. They threaten them by saying that they're going to harm their family members back home. And they end up in bondage to these criminal organizations. And that is the kind of activity that's facilitated by open borders policies.
Mm-hmm. This is such an important discussion because people have this idea that immigration policy is callous because you're preventing these young people from coming here. And obviously, most people would agree that we want to give young people opportunities, but what we don't understand is that they are being used as covers, as you say, for the criminals, either by smuggling in the drugs themselves or being accompanied by the criminals who get through across our border because they are with those children. I was reading about legal immigration policy in preparation for this interview, and I read that President Johnson signed an immigration bill back in 1965 that expanded legal immigration, not just for people coming from Europe, but from people coming from Latin America, Asia, and Africa. So what I want to ask you is, I understand how legal immigration expanded under that law, but how did this illegal immigration component become so big? It seems that back in the 60s, we didn't have this problem that we have now. When did it start and why?
Well, first of all, one of the reasons we didn't have as much illegal migration back then was that even though our border was less guarded than it is now and there are fewer barriers, the laws were enforced in the interior of the country and it was harder for illegal migrants to get a job and there weren't sanctuary jurisdictions to protect them. Um, and there were no promises of rewarding illegal crossings with an amnesty. Really, this problem of illegal migration picked up in the 1990s. Now, part of it was that international travel became easier, but a lot of it really started to occur because in 1986, at the time, our illegal population was just a couple of million people, probably 3 million people living here illegally. Well, Congress thought it would be a good idea to have this grand bargain of giving an amnesty to people living in the country illegally and promising to crack down on illegal employment and at the border. Well, the amnesty happened and legalized about 3 million illegal aliens, but the promised enforcement never happened. And the people who were legalized were allowed to bring in their family members through our legal immigration system, which has a large emphasis on chain migration, allowing people to bring their family members here. So over time, you know, people have come to realize that if they can get into the United States and fly under the radar of immigration enforcement, and if they can get a job and live here as if they're here legally, in some states they can get a driver's license, they get access to welfare benefits, their kids are in schools, then it's worth the risk for them to do this because ultimately they believe that they will be rewarded with an amnesty. Mm-hmm. And we've seen this recently when there are talks of an amnesty, whether it's an amnesty for DACA, the so-called dreamers, of people who came as kids, or other groups. They all want to be here to benefit from that and have be put on a path to citizenship and the opportunity to bring in more family members. So every time we have an amnesty, that just incentivizes more illegal immigration. And we've seen that lately too, when the Biden administration said that one of their top priorities was going to be an amnesty for pretty much everyone living here illegally. So you can understand the thought process of millions of people overseas thinking, I want to get there to try to take advantage of that.
Mm-hmm. I know it's such a big question and a difficult one, but what do you think the United States should do? Obviously, it's a phenomenally heartbreaking issue to see people who don't have the same economic opportunities that we have, who may, I know you say that it's a smaller percentage, but who may experience political persecution. It's very hard to say no to those people at the border. I recognize that. But at the same time, what I am gathering from this conversation is that the situation that we are in now is just not tenable. What do you think the best course of action is? Should we try to invest more in these Latin American countries to create economic growth? Should we be more hospitable with our legal immigration policy? I know that we are one of the most generous countries in that regard. What do you think is the best solution?
Well, you're right. This is fraught with emotion, and Americans cherish our tradition of immigration. But, the problem is that we cannot solve the world's problems by letting everyone move to the United States.
Right.
And we need to remember also that our immigration policy needs to serve our national interest. And the reality is that right now, with a generous legal immigration policy based mostly on chain migration and a lot of illegal migration, it is not only a burden for taxpayers, but also disadvantaging those Americans who are in direct competition with new immigrants and with illegal immigrants for job opportunities. And we should not have policies that disadvantage Americans or cause their wages to be depressed. We should focus our efforts on getting Americans who are not now working into those job opportunities. And so it means we have to say no to some people. We do have a generous legal policy, um, and especially a generous humanitarian immigration policy. But we are a modern country now, and the policies that seemed sensible in 1965 are not going to serve our modern economy and our modern citizenry. What we need to do is, first of all, obviously get control of our border, because as Donald Trump said, a country without a border is not a country for very long. And we need to modernize our immigration system so that we can bring in immigrants who are highly educated, highly skilled, who are going to be self-sufficient when they get here and contribute to our economy. Also with um, a number of people whose only option, who've been displaced by war or civil strife or persecution, and their only option is to move to another country. Those people we should be bringing here. And some amount of family-based migration, immediate relatives, spouses, all of that. But, that's really about all the immigration that will benefit our country. We should put more efforts into helping people be successful where they are.
Right. It's so interesting because my instinct is to ask you about what we should do to help those individuals, because that's what the national conversation is about. But we don't talk enough about what this is doing to our country and how we can help our own people. So it just shows you how much that discourse has shifted. So obviously the expiration on Wednesday of Title 42 has been in the news a lot over the past week. Can you explain to us what Title 42 is and why its expiration is such a big deal?
Sure. Title 42 is an authority under our public health laws that allows the president to deny admission to any person or group of people or everyone who's trying to come in from abroad. And it was invoked at the start of the COVID pandemic as a public health measure. And the Biden administration has preserved use of Title 42 in a very limited way in order to maintain some semblance of control at the border, even though it hasn't worked to actually control the flow of people, because they've made so many exceptions to Title 42. Anyone with a child, any family member, anyone claiming fear of persecution. And so a lot of attention has been focused on the end of Title 42, and that this is going to set off an even bigger wave of migration. And it appears that is actually what's going to happen. But the problem is that Title 42 is a public health authority. And even in its limited application by the Biden administration, it has helped by allowing them to expel some people from the United States. But it's not a silver bullet to border security. What needs to happen is we need to move beyond Title 42, let it expire, but insist that the Biden administration start enforcing Title 8, which is the immigration law. And that's where they have the tools to control the border if they choose to use them. We have good immigration laws. The problem is they're not being used by the Biden administration to stem this flow of people, unprecedented flow of people into the United States illegally. So I would like to see the conversation shift over to how the Biden administration is going to use Title 8 once Title 42 is gone.
Can you say more about Title 8 and what exactly is in the provisions? You say that we actually do have really good immigration laws in this country. What are some of those laws?
Well, for one thing, Title 8 directs the Department of Homeland Security officials to detain anyone who has crossed the border illegally, and expel them if they don't have a claim to be able to stay here. They would be able to use that authority to remove most of the illegal border crossers. It also allows the president to tell people that if they want to apply for asylum, they have to wait in Mexico. The so-called Remain in Mexico policy is legal and that authority is found in Title VIII. And if the Biden administration used that tool, that would be extremely effective in deterring people from trying to cross illegally. And that would enable the Border Patrol to focus on really controlling all of the border. The other thing that goes unused in Title VIII is interior enforcement, which allows immigration, really directs ICE officers to arrest and remove those who are in the country without permission to be here, and even people who have been ordered removed already by an immigration judge. So there are many ways we could enforce our immigration laws if we chose, and if Congress provided adequate resources. But the truth is, the Biden administration complains that they don't have the resources to enforce immigration laws. But really, the Department of Homeland Security has as much in funding as it has ever had, but is removing fewer and fewer people every year. Even the people who have committed crimes in this country, who should be a priority, all of that has been dismantled by the Biden administration. And their excuse is that, well, we just don't have enough money. And that is not true. They have the resources. They're doing less with more resources than ever before.
Seems like ideology is just taken over for common sense in every category these days.
Right.
Jessica, thank you again for coming on. All of you can find out more about Jessica by looking her up on the Center for Immigration Studies and read her articles, because they are spectacular and full of information. Jessica, I look forward to having you on the program again.
Thanks so much, Julie. Be my pleasure.
Remember, like a sculptor starting with a block of clay and the tools to form it, each of our thoughts, choices, and actions shape who we are. So let's think clearly, choose wisely, and act with principle and determination. See you tomorrow. Thanks so much.